Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We got news tonight on two of the criminal cases against Donald Trump in New York. The judge overseeing Trump's hush money election interference trial just denied the ex-president's latest bid to delay based on his, frankly, bogus claim of presidential immunity for his hush money payment. So that case is full steam ahead. The trial is now set to begin in less than 2 weeks on April 15th. It really looks like it's going to happen. Meanwhile, the case about Trump's reckless mishandling of classified documents and then obstruction of justice and trying to cover up that activity, well, that is still dragging, thanks almost exclusively to District Court Judge Aileen Cannon, that woman there. Now, Cannon was 39 years old when she got the lifetime position she was appointed to, not like particularly distinguished at the time. And she was appointed that position, in fact, in the lame duck session after the election, by the accused document mishandler in this case, Donald Trump. And this situation may finally now be coming to a head. In a striking new filing, Special Counsel Jack Smith hinted that he may ask a higher court, the Court of Appeals above Judge Cannon, to correct her because of how badly she has mishandled the case. This has been building for a long time. And remember, we first met Aileen Cannon back in 2022 in the wake of the FBI's first search of Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago. And Judge Cannon ended up sort of issuing a ruling that was wildly favorable to Donald Trump. She stepped in and she stopped the process of the government going through the search records and instead appointed a special master to review the seized documents, which blocked the government's investigation. And people were really taken aback by this ruling. Experts blasted it, calling it corrupt and lawless. And then an appeals court quickly reversed it, including some, Trump-appointed judges above her, 3-0. But then, as luck would have it, Aileen Cannon was later randomly assigned to the actual criminal case once the charges were brought in June of last year. And at every turn since then, she has appeared to be in over her head while also bending over backwards to rule in Trump's favor and slow-walking any progress towards a trial. And today we may have finally reached the breaking point that could bring about the end of the Aileen Cannon experiment. It could all come tumbling down because of Donald Trump's ludicrous argument that the classified documents, the highly classified documents, the nation's secrets found in his personal possession are actually his to do with as he pleases. Of course, that is not what the law says. The thing you got to understand here is that the current law around presidential records goes back to the 1970s. This is not ancient history. We don't have to investigate what the founders thought, okay? When Richard Nixon resigned in the wake of the Watergate scandal, because he was both corrupt and greedy, Nixon wanted to take documents and those infamous Nixon tapes home with him to Florida as his own personal possessions so he could use them for his own personal benefit. I mean, the records were highly valuable. They could be sold for profit or they could be donated for huge tax write-offs. At one point, there was even the possibility that the tapes would be burned onto records for sale.
We're told there will be a rush to see who can get them out first, since it is thought the first records on the market will sell 1 million copies or more. And we might guess that soon after, some record producer will set the Nixon conversations to music, flutes and cellos perhaps, or a 60-piece band playing Hail to the Chief, and then try to get them played on the radio, most likely the rock station, since this material may not qualify as classical. Eventually, Nixon, relaxing in San Clemente, might turn on the radio and find he has made the top 40.
Basically like the Trump high-top sneakers 40 years ahead of its time, 50 years ahead of its time. So a few months after Nixon's resignation, his successor, Gerald Ford, signed the first measure that was intended at protecting those records. That was called the Presidential Recordings and Materials Preservation Act.
White House sources said today that President Ford will sign a bill passed by the Congress giving custody of the Nixon tapes and papers to the federal government. The bill nullifies an agreement between Nixon and the Ford administration, which would give the former president possession of the tapes and documents.
Now, again, that didn't end things. In fact, the fight over Nixon's records, what he called his records, that were actually the U.S.'s records, that went on for decades. It only concluded with an $18 million settlement between the federal government and the former president's estate in the year 2000. But it only took a few years for legislation to come together afterwards that established the rules that would then govern all future official records. right? We never want this Nixon thing to happen again. We don't want people absconding from the White House with like records brimming out of their pockets. So we're going to pass the Presidential Records Act, which was signed into law by President Jimmy Carter in 1978. And the Presidential Records Act explicitly established that presidential records are the property of us, the American people, not the individual in the White House. Quote, the United States shall reserve and retain complete ownership, possession, and control of presidential records. This is black letter law, extremely clear, extremely well established. And the records we're talking about here, remember, are classified documents, not like something that he like doodled as a, or a painting he made as a gift for someone. But Donald Trump has been arguing consistently that the Presidential Records Act, which we just gave you the history of, actually means the exact opposite of what it says. That the Presidential Records Act actually means that the official records from his presidency are his private property to take.
I can't imagine you ever saying, bring me some of the boxes that we brought back from the White House. I'd like to look at them. Did you ever do that?
I would have the right to do that. There's nothing wrong with it.
But I know you. I don't think you would do it.
Well, I don't have a lot of time, but I would have the right to do that. Right. I would do that. There'd be
All right, let me move on.
Remember this.
Yeah.
This is the Presidential Records Act. I have the right to take stuff. Do you know that they ended up paying Richard Nixon, I think, $18 million for what he had? They did the Presidential Records Act. I have the right to take stuff. I have the right to look at stuff.
No, you don't. No, that's the opposite. Let's just do this again. They paid him $18 million because the Presidential Records Act didn't apply at the time because it hadn't been passed. But to make sure that never happened again, they passed and signed the Presidential Records Act, which says literally the opposite. Okay? As political science professor Seth Maskett put it, it's like saying the Brady Bill gave every American a handgun. Now, Donald Trump can say whatever he wants in Fox News interviews, but in a legal setting, this argument should get laughed out of court. Trump's lawyers have actually made this claim in court to Judge Cannon that the Presidential Records Act gives Trump the authority to decide whether a record is personal or presidential. That he could do this like magical transubstantiation where he waves his hand over a document. Well, that's personal. Special counsel Jack Smith basically said that is ludicrous, calling it a fundamentally flawed legal premise. Okay, black and white issue. What did Judge Aileen Cannon do? Well, get this, because it's weird. Her decision was to tell both sides, Trump's lawyers and Smith, to write instructions for the jury, each based on their interpretation of the law. So the idea is that Jack Smith's team would draft jury instructions with the correct interpretation of the law, and Donald Trump's team would draft them with the completely wrong, opposite interpretation of the law, and then Judge Cannon would decide which one to use. So, like, maybe there'd be a jury instruction being like, just so you know, before we do this, Presidential Records Act means the opposite of what it clearly says. Got that? For this reason, Cannon's order that they both go and draft their own jury instructions was met with near universal condemnation. Again, not the first time this has happened to her. From judges and lawyers and the prosecutors in Jack Smith's office. Now Smith is taking a clear stand, essentially telling Judge Cannon, if she indulges this wildly lawless argument that Donald Trump can take whatever he wants because the Presidential Records Act says so, an argument that's literally the opposite of the law, that he may seek Judge Cannon's removal, which would be an extraordinary step. It's an explicit threat, and it means that this case against Donald Trump is coming to a head in a really explosive way.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.